Welcome to the Clear to Send podcast, a podcast about wireless engineering, where we educate you on Wi-Fi technology, talk about design tips, troubleshooting, interviews, and the tools. Here are your hosts, Roel and Francois.
Today's show is brought to you by Audible. Audible is offering our listeners a free audiobook with a 30-day trial membership. Just go to audibletrial.com/clear2send and browse the fantastic selection of audio programs. Download a title free and start listening. It's that easy. Again, go to audibletrial.com/clear2send. Hey everybody, thank you for joining us on this episode of Clear to Send. We're here to bring you some more feedback that we saw from Mobility Field Day 3. I am your host, Roel Dionisio, with your co-host, Francois. How are you doing, Francois?
Hi, Roel. Very good. How are you?
Yeah, doing well. It's still warm, so I don't think winter's coming. I think winter is taking a break, or fall.
That's good, man. It's already cold in Canada.
Oh, it is? Well, I guess it left here and went over there because it's about over 80 degrees here, but, can't complain too much. I'd rather be a little warm than covered in snow.
Well, it's not snow yet, so we still have a couple months to go.
I thought Canada was always cold.
Yeah, I've seen the pictures. It's white all the time, right?
Well, anyways, we're here to talk about our reaction to Nyansa at Mobility Field Day 3. I was there, so I can provide my feedback, but Francois, you saw some of the videos. What was your initial impression?
My initial impression, I guess, what they collect a lot of data, and I love their dashboard. Maybe on video it's not, you cannot really see it, but I just love the way they the colors they use and the way they show the data. What's not easy, because you have so much data, is trying to understand the data and analyze it. I'm sure if you're used to the product, it's you know where to go quickly. But yeah, I'm impressed with the amount of data they're able to collect. They don't only collect data from the Wi-Fi equipment. I believe they collect data from other systems in the network, and they're able to correlate all of that.
Yeah, I think that's where they're a little bit different from some of the other vendors that incorporate this into their solutions. For one, Nyansa stands alone. They're not part of any of the vendors like Cisco or Aruba, right? They're their own product. And what they'll do is they have ties into your network. So they can take, for example, a span port off your switch and see all that traffic and then correlate that with what it sees on the wireless side as well. So you could that's why they collect so much data, is because they can see so much of what's going on inside of your network and actually give you a reason as to, okay, we are seeing things like DNS latency or DHCP problems. Your DHCP server's taking too long to respond to DHCP requests, things like that.
So I think the complexity was getting a lot of data like that, and I think we've all seen it. If you're troubleshooting or monitoring Wi-Fi or any networks, not necessarily Wi-Fi's, sometimes you're gonna get one client that get 100% of errors, but it's just because this client I don't know, have tried it once and failed once, so it's 100%. Right?
Yeah.
So you know what I mean? It's like we've all seen that. So I think what I would expect for those systems, the Nyansa, Viance, and all of these data collection cloud system, is that they're able to correlate all of this information and show us actually what's the most critical issue we're having, with the most impact on the network, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I do. And I think Nyansa does provide that, but it's more of you get this and more, right? They have the dashboard, which kind of has a few things just on the dashboard. You got your core services, like, is Wi-Fi doing okay? Is DNS doing okay? DHCP, and it gives you those priorities. And then from there, if you do have an issue with with Wi-Fi, you can actually drill into there, right? There's thresholds just like any other system, and if it goes below the threshold, you dive into that scenario, and you could actually that's where they have so much data collected, is they give you that data up front. And but yeah, I see what you mean. It's like, okay, well, are all the users then having, is it just DNS issues, or what kind of Wi-Fi issue are they having? And I think they maybe Nyansa just needs to make that more like more popping out on the screen and go, these are the APs that you're having issues on. These are all together. Kind of seems like RF interference because of the data we collected from the controller, and we see a lot of retries, that kind of thing. Maybe it needs to be more prominent. I don't know.
I mean, like the amount of data they have is it's
Mind
mind
blowing.
blowing. Like if you click on one host or one wireless client, you will get access to the Wi-Fi stats. Like
Hmm.
SNR, and they even have this Wi-Fi performance index that they give you, the amount of data sent over the Wi-Fi and stuff. But they also give you like the layer 3 information, the packet information, and then the layer 7, the different applications. So you can actually select like Google Mail or Microsoft Office 365, and then they'll give you even more stats per application.
Yeah, I think that view of client, with the client view, I think that's my most favorite piece of the application, because when you're troubleshooting, right, a lot of times you don't have the ability to go there on site, or there right where the client is, or maybe that this issue happened when the client was there but they're not there anymore, but they put in a ticket and said, hey, about 3 hours ago I had Wi-Fi issues over here, can you look into it? And most of the time people don't have data from back then, right? It's
Yeah,
more of like,
it's like real time.
I can only troubleshoot when you're having the issue at the very moment, but rarely does that happen. So that's why so much data gets collected. And in this client view, like you mentioned, you get these nice fancy graphs on there. What SNR is the client getting, but you got to remember that this data is being collected from the controllers, which is getting it from the APs. So that is an AP's perspective. So a lot of this data will be AP from the AP's point of view, but we'll talk about something in just a little bit that might change that. But I do like that they show how many layer two retries there are, just like what you're saying. And what's really neat is they provide a timeline, an event timeline, so you could see when the client connected, and maybe where they had issues, such as they had a bad roam, because going from AP1 to AP2, there was a lot of retransmits, or it took too long of a roam time, that kind of thing. So maybe you can correlate data there, maybe because device is jumping between access points too often. So there's a lot of data there, and you do have to do. I guess there is a little bit more work on your part as a end user to correlate that data and really determine what's wrong, because they are
Yeah,
giving you so much data.
yeah, but I mean, if you work like as a network support engineer or something, you're gonna receive a ticket, and then you're gonna get information from the customer. It says, it stopped working for me yesterday around 5 p.m. or whatever, and
Hmm.
you could get a first glance of an idea of what happened if you go
Hmm.
back in time. Like the timeline is amazing. Like the ability to go back in time and see what happened on the network, see that you had a bad roam or rages, bad authentication. Like that's crazy. If you just show that to an old network engineer, they'd be like mine, like someone like retired. They'd be like, "What? That's amazing, right?"
Yeah, because they didn't have this data. We didn't have
Yeah,
this data. I don't know, maybe a couple of years ago. The
yeah,
to this extent, because it's not just Wi-Fi. Because when you look at a client view, and what I mean by client view is, if you look at just a specific client that might be having issues, you can look at things besides Wi-Fi. You can go and see how's the DHCP performance going. Like, how is it receiving DHCP offers when it's requesting it, or maybe it's not. Maybe it's going to the wrong server, right? You can even see if it's using the wrong DNS server, which is interesting.
Yeah, and they and because they collect so much data from different customers, they're also able to take advantage of the cloud once again, right? To correlate those data and then tell you how you're doing comparing to other customers that have the same type of environment.
Well, maybe that's where they need to fully utilize the artificial intelligence to, because I feel you do actually need to understand Wi-Fi, and you have to understand your network and how it's supposed to work,
Mm.
because you do have to look at different pieces of data and then make some sort of correlation as to what your next action steps are going to be, right? What are you going to do to resolve the issue? Because Nyansa doesn't do that for you. It doesn't have a
Yeah.
tie into your controller to say, all right, you need to reconfigure this AP to this channel, and it's not going to have any effect to RRM, but it does give you that data to come to that conclusion. And maybe there needs to be something that Voyance needs to do and just give you that information. I don't know if how far we are from getting to that point where I don't need to actually look at different times, right? Different times of the day to see how that client was performing.
I think they talked about it a little bit in the presentation, and they were talking about, maybe if we see something that's recurrent and we know that some customers fixed it by, doing X, Y, and Z, we could like, prepare like the CLI commands to implement in order to fix a situation and provide that to the user. They could go ahead and then implement it on their network. You see what I mean?
Yeah, and I think a lot of this too is part of operations and the process, because
Yeah.
the anti-voyance product has a lot of tie into things like ServiceNow, where you can create
Mhm.
tickets. There's a different view called Service Desk for maybe the lower level IT guys to do some initial troubleshooting and to gather data, to look at that data, and then you can create a ticket into ServiceNow with that view, and then it's a lot of that data core gathering up front, right? Because you can see things like, okay, here's the device, the MAC address, here's the SSID it was connecting to on this channel, on this access point, and then you can drill in further and go, what was happening on that access point? Were there too many users? Maybe there was a lot of interference on that access point. Did that access point have any other issues with RF? There's still just a lot of, like you said, a lot of data, because I can keep drilling down further and further. You can see things like, well, what transmit power level was it last using at that time? So, and, and it's not just client data you can troubleshoot. You can troubleshoot access points, right? And they didn't even show this in the demo, but you could look at the event timeline for an AP and see when it changed channels or when it changed transmit power, for example, or maybe if it lost connectivity. So that's kind of interesting data to help correlate something. So maybe when users dropped off, you can correlate that to an AP for some reason, rebooting. I don't know.
Yeah. Or maybe a DFS event, something like
Yeah,
that.
or a DFS event. I mean, that's something that you would want to know, but that's also nothing different from what some of the other solutions provide, right? You can, if you look at it from a Cisco perspective, I think Archer could tell, Archer, what is it called? Cisco Prime can tell you what if it saw DFS events or what happened to an AP radio. So I think they Nyansa does give you a lot of information up front, but they also give you some potential root causes. But maybe it needs to go a step further and actually help get to the actual root cause. And I don't know what that next step could be to get there, but maybe there's enough data to determine that.
Yeah. I think it's a good point, and I think it's also the advantage of Nyansa is that they get access to all of those data for all of their customers. It's not like, if you have your Cisco Prime, you're only seeing of the data of your network, right? Nyansa,
Mhm.
they can compare how your network is doing to other customers, and then they can use those data to influence, I guess, what they show you.
Yeah,
They
come,
could
come to some
even,
sort of conclusion over client drivers, for example, or maybe
yeah.
client types. maybe iOS version 10 or Apple, I don't know, iPhone 7 Plus is better at Wi-Fi than the 6.
Yeah. They probably have this information. They can probably, what they could do. They could probably classify the customers. Like this one has the best Wi-Fi, right? And give like a award, like a, Nyansa award for the best Wi-Fi.
Yeah, I think that might be a missed opportunity by Nyansa because you could even classify the type of code you're running on your controller. Maybe this certain code is causing a lot of poor Wi-Fi, but then when you upgrade to a different version, all of a sudden Wi-Fi gets better, right? Maybe that if they correlate that across the board across different clients, they can help provide that information to people and say, "Hey, we're seeing a lot of this types of issues, which are actually looks like could be resolved in this version." But is that something the ANSA should be doing, or is that something for the vendor to
I
to
mean, I mean
provide?
that's something they could go back and talk to the vendor about. I'm not sure if they announce it publicly, how the vendors are going to feel about it, right?
Yeah, because
You
no
see what I
vendor
mean?
wants to be put in that position.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I'm not too sure. They probably already talked to vendors and be like, okay, we have this data that's showing that this version of code is it's not working well for those type of customers. Maybe you should tell them to upgrade or something. I don't know. But
But
that's
there,
that's some of the data they could use. Maybe they could even monetize it. I don't know.
but there's also the other point of this, or the other view, is the data that it collects also depends on the design of the wireless
Yeah,
network, right? So
and the
the
customer too.
yeah, and how it was deployed, because the information is only good if it's good coming into the system, right? Garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
Now, if you got a poor design, I would expect that um, Voyance will probably tell you how bad it is. But in comparison to somebody else who might have a little bit better of a design than you, right? Then
Yeah.
it's kind of looking at the data comparisons. You're still missing a lot of pieces there, especially when it comes to how somebody designed that network.
Yeah, so I think that's why that's when the AI comes in, right? You need to be able to compare apples with apples, right? So if you're like an airport, right, you can expect Nyansa to compare your network to other airports, right? And tell you, okay, your airport is doing good versus other airports. So if you're a university, same thing, right? And maybe you can create. I know Anand talked a little bit about it, but you could create communities of people starting talking together, exchanging information about how they were able to achieve good Wi-Fi in the airports or in their universities, which
Hmm.
settings they thought was good and appears to be doing good according to the data Nyansa is seeing. And then maybe they could even establish, I hate the word, but like best practices for some type of environment, and then say that, okay, according to the data we have, we've seen that this feature works well in your environment in 75% of the case, something like that. You see what I
You,
mean?
you know what's interesting about that, Francois, is Nyansa actually has a feature where you could talk to another organization, because you can compare yourself with anonymously with somebody else. And now
Yeah.
there's a feature they rolled out where you can say, "Hey, can I like know who this person is and talk to them, because they seem to be doing very well on in these areas, and I want to know what are they doing differently." And so then you can get in communication with them, talk to them directly, and maybe you guys are both using Cisco controllers, same model, same version, but why is their 5 gig performance still better than yours? And then you can kind of work together on what the differences are. That's kind of a new feature that they actually have in Voyance, and they
Yeah.
talked about that briefly at Mobility Field Day 3. But one of the things too that I don't want to talk too much about the comparison thing, because we can go down a rabbit hole there. But one of the features they did talk about was the client agent. And when it comes
Mhm.
to gathering metrics, a lot of this is from the AP's perspective. But now Voyance has a client agent which you can install on laptops. Now there isn't an agent for Cisco, or not for Apple iOS, because of the restrictions that are on that iOS,
Platform.
but
Yeah.
you can put it on a Mac OS. You can put it on Windows. I think there's a Linux client coming out. I think that's a big step in data gathering, right? Because now you have more accurate information coming from the client itself. So you can correlate that client and what the AP hears, put that information in the Voyance dashboard and actually correlate the data properly and say, here's the problem, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's nice because you're able to get more data. The only issue I see with the agents is you're gonna have to install them, and
Yep.
it's nice if you have control over your devices, but in some cases you don't.
Yeah, if you're in higher education, how do you get that agent
Yeah,
installed on a student's laptop, for example? So you would definitely have to work with the student. And then there's the fact that you got to remove the agent when you're done collecting your data.
yeah. But it's nice when you can install it and get the data, the extra data from the client side. It's
Yeah, because
that's often what we complain about when we do Wi-Fi troubleshooting. Is like, okay, it's nice to see what the AP sees, but what about the client device?
yeah, how is the client? It's half of the conversation if you're just getting it from the AP.
Hmm.
And I think this closes the conversation because now you can run some very specific tests on the client agent. If it has access to some of the drivers, I think it'll collect some information like on battery because battery could affect
Hmm.
your Wi-Fi performance because it could turn
Power
off.
saving
Yeah,
modes and
power
yeah,
save mode. And from there, then you could say, all right, here's all the information I have now. Here's the reason why you have such poor Wi-Fi performance. It could be that you're really trying to do a lot with 10% battery. I don't know.
yeah.
Yeah, I think a client agent is a good step. I just don't see how a big rollout will how that will impact your um,
The data.
the
Yeah.
management of the data, for example, and then just the management of agents themselves. But I think it's a good step to be being able to put an agent on a client and actually see and maybe track actual application performance. And the way I can see this moving forward is if you've got applications that have APIs and Nyansa has APIs, maybe that client agent can tie into the APIs and, for example, monitor the quality of a Zoom call, a Zoom meeting, or a WebEx meeting, and being able to actually get those metrics into the Voyance dashboard.
A question I'm asking myself for the future of Nyansa, do you think they'll, because we're starting to see vendors, implementing some of these advanced monitoring features into their platforms. So, do you think they are, they'll, I don't know, they'll get acquired by some vendor one day, or they'll just try to stand out in
Yeah.
other ways? How do you see it?
It's going to be interesting because if you compare them to other vendors who have implemented this, some vendors are doing it well, and some vendors are still having maybe a difficult time trying to also display the data that needs to be shown. So I think
Yeah.
Niansa will definitely be around, and they may be acquired by a company who just can't get it right, and they can have Niansa, implement it for them properly. The way I see this is Niansa can be that third party, right? They can help validate other people's networks,
Yeah.
and it doesn't
Yeah.
matter who that vendor could be, well, depending on how they tie in. Because right now I think they support Cisco, Aruba. I don't know which other ones they support, but especially those guys who still have controller based um, architectures, because if you look at the controllers now for Cisco, they just don't provide you much information. So
Yeah.
you could use Voyance on top of that to actually see the performance of your network, because maybe you can't move to a cloud managed architectures, or you can't get a Meraki in there. So this could be one way to see what's going on in your network, get some visibility. So I do still think they're gonna have a future there as long as they keep being able to really display the data that the user needs to see. I think if they simplify that and then have the ability to dive in deeper and actually do your own correlation, then I think they still have a good future.
Yes, that's a good point. I didn't think about that, and also, the fact that they have all of this data, the big data. Maybe they could use that for their business as well, moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's a huge opportunity to being able to create these reports on how these devices, these vendors are actually working on wireless networks, right? A view from a third party's perspective, like here's how these devices work. Here's how certain IoT devices work on wireless networks. These versions of drivers are not working compared to this version, or maybe even comparing vendor versions that are out. Like this version doesn't work very well, so you should upgrade or downgrade. I mean, you can slice and dice this because of so much data they collect, and I think that could be their most biggest challenge.
Yeah, it's interesting to see.
Yeah,
Anyway, in the future.
yeah, and I'll be honest, the presentation that Nyansa did wasn't I think the best presentation. I think there's a lot more under the hood than they showed. There's a lot more capability there, but it's because there's so much data. It's just kind of hard to really show those benefits. And I think you would probably have to get a hold of a demo and actually see how that works. Yeah, that's my view on Nyansa Voyant, and I think they're making progress, especially with the client agent and being able to do white papers. And they just recently did the Cisco findings um, with a
Yeah,
partnership with Apple, and I think that's I think a good way to start.
and it's
Keep
good
going.
insight for the customers.
Yeah, for sure, and it's a way to validate your networks too, right? You'll see your trends, and once you make the changes, your design changes, you can then see, okay, now the performance is much better. You move on to the next. You just keep improving your network and seeing where there's issues and fix those. So I think Niance's got a good future, especially if they're gonna maintain the company as private and being able to tie into different vendors. So looking forward to seeing what comes next.
Yeah, and they usually come back to Mobility Field Days and they're present at conferences. So I'm sure we'll hear from them again in the near future.
Yeah, and aside from that, they were at Network Field Day 18 and
Oh,
they presented on
okay.
WAN analytics. So they are doing more than just wireless.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Well, that's all I have for my feedback and reaction to Nyansa's presentation. Probably talked a little bit more than what they presented, but anything else you want to add, Francois?
No, just I love the dashboard, the quarters, and I,
You
I
like the
actually
dark theme,
just
huh?
and I went to on the map and I went to my hometown Dijon in France and I took a screenshot and I was like I put it on Twitter and I was like I like how my hometown looks like on the dashboard.
You just need some clients out
And
there.
I like how they outline the airports in black, so maybe it's to tell us that we might see DFS events. I'm
Yeah.
not too sure.
Possibly. We'll add some screenshots. So we'll have some notes and some screenshots in the show notes if you guys want to see what that looks like. You can actually see a demo, and that's what Francois and I are talking about because we logged into the demo page and started playing around with what's available to us. And I believe that is actual client data. It's just anonymized, so you don't know who it is. But yeah, if you guys have any questions or feedback or any comments you'd like to add, hit us up on Twitter at Clear2Send or head over to the show notes and leave a comment down below. We'd like to see what you guys think and get your feel for what's going out there with analytics and AI and kind of get your viewpoint. Do you think it's kind of murky, or do you think this is really some fantastic stuff that's coming out in Wi-Fi right now? So we want to thank you guys for listening. Again, head over to the show notes and we'll see you guys on the next episode. Thanks, guys.
See you guys. Thank you.